Hello everyone and welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Peafowl DF-1. I'm not gonna lie, this is far from my favorite camera, but we're still gonna give it the treatment of a couple of videos so you can learn a lot about it. The Peafowl DF-1 is an interchangeable lens 35mm SLR. What does that mean? Well, interchangeable lens means that the lens on it can be removed at any time and a different lens can be mounted as long as you're not taking a photo at that moment, and you're going to be just fine. 35mm means it can take any 35mm film you want to put in it, and because this does not have a light meter, it literally can take any 35mm film you would like, and as long as you can deliver an aperture and shutter speed that your film needs for the light that you have, you can take a photo with this camera. And single lens reflex means it has a single lens on the front of it, and the light passing through that lens will become the photo you're going to take. It will pass through that lens to a mirror that's behind the lens, up to this pentaprism here, and then out to the viewfinder eyepiece in the back of the camera, which is what you use to sight up and take your photo. The Peafowl DF-1 has no light meter, as I mentioned, shutter speeds of 1/1000th of a second on the fast end to 1 full second on the slow plus bulb. The flash sync speed is an X indicator between 1/60th and 1/30th, so it's probably a 40th or a 50th, somewhere in that range. I couldn't find exactly what the flash sync speed is on this camera because finding out information about the specifics and technical aspects of this camera was very hard. The viewfinder magnification on the back and the frame coverage are both unknown. What I can tell you from having shot a handful of rolls of film with this camera is that the frame coverage, the frame coverage is, compared to other cameras that have no light meter, there's a lot on the negatives that is not in the viewfinder, and the magnification seems like it's okay, but the images are kind of small here. The focusing screen inside of the camera is a fixed focusing screen, meaning you cannot replace it, and it's just a plain matte field. And that's one of the big strengths of this camera, is the focusing screen. It's not super bright, but there is nothing to interfere with your view through the viewfinder. No light meter, there's no texture changes, no microprism color. It's just plain ground matte field. It's actually really kind of lovely to use. And but I will say, all of that, this remains one of the worst cameras I've ever used, and I feel bad saying that because on paper this checks all the boxes for what I would really, really like in a camera, but there are some issues with the way that it's refined. So one of them is the SR mount that this uses. I have tried a number of different SR mount lenses. Some of them simply don't mount. Some of them do. Actually, for this video, I was like, oh, I'll grab the 50mm f1.4 and the 58-1.4 that I have here, and I'll show that they don't mount, and then they both did mount. So some, maybe most SR mount lenses will mount, some simply will not. Okay, another thing is, like, when we talk about refinements and handling, is the shutter's very loud, but then the film advance rather, is really hard to engage. The plastic here is really narrow. It's not comfortable on the fingers or the thumb, and just advancing the film is really a rough process. The gearing does not feel like it's been well engineered or well milled for this camera. Also, the viewfinder, even though I do like it as being just a plain matte screen, because I love a plain matte screen viewfinder, because it's such a small frame coverage area, when you hold your eye right up to the viewfinder, what you get is you see a whole lot of prism housing. It's like looking at a small rectangle inside of a large dark tunnel. So, I don't know, it's kind of weird. I can't think of any other camera I've used that's exactly like that. And one other minor thing with this camera is, as you might notice, on the side here, this hinge is like popping its way out. It's done this before. I have to push it back in every now and then. It's not cooperating today. It does not want to go back in, but like that's just something that frankly shouldn't happen. All complaining aside, there are some things really nice about this camera. It's very bulky. It feels very solid, and it does have very accurate shutter speeds insofar as I can tell, because the exposures it delivers are fantastic. So, plus, honestly, it looks great. I think it's a really stunningly good-looking camera. The Peafowl DF-1 was intended for the upper-end market, and we know this because of approximately when it came out. I couldn't find the exact manufacturing dates for it, but it was maybe late 60s, early 70s, somewhere in that time frame, and it was made for the Chinese market. And at that time in China, any single lens reflex camera would have been an upper end camera. So yeah, and the SR mount is a bayonet mount interchangeable lens camera. Yeah, would have been definitely for that market. It was made by the Shanghai Camera Company in Shanghai, China, and that's really about the most information that's available out there. So what we're going to do now is, if you have your Peafowl DF-1, we're going to go through all of the features on the camera and talk about what all of them are. A couple of them, MLU and self-timer, we'll talk about in this video what they do, but most of the functions we'll talk about in the second video. So we're on the top here, but technically we'll start on the front with these two strap lugs, and these can take any split ring. Now, as you can see, I actually removed the ones that came with it because the finish on this is immaculate, and I didn't want to damage the finish with split rings. So, but at any rate, you can put some split rings in here and then connect a camera strap. These indicators are your flash sync indicators. We'll take a look at the PC ports on the side in a moment, but these tell you which type of flash sync each of the PC sockets is for. This is your film rewind knob and lever, as well as when you lift it up all the way, you can open up the back of the camera like that. This is your flash hot shoe right here. This little symbol indicates where the film plane is, so you can take exact measurements for things like high magnification, macro, or microscopy work. This is your shutter speed selection dial here, and if you lift the ring and rotate it and rotate the ring, now you get a film speed memo. This says ASA, ASA and ISO are the exact same thing, so if you have 400 ISO film, you adjust this to 400. Does not do anything for the camera in the way that it shoots photos, but it will remind you at minimum what speed film you have in there. Shutter release button here, and you can see it's got a threaded socket for a cable release. Film advance lever, not enjoyable to use. Loud shutter, that's okay. Characteristic sound, it's loud, but I do actually kind of like the sound of the shutter. Frame count window right here. On the front of the camera, we have the make and model, and then a Peafowl graphic or design, which is really a lovely touch. This is the self-timer button, and the way that the self-timer works is you simply rotate this out to arm it, and then lift this little switch upward to fire it. Before we do that, this is the mirror lockup button right here on the side of the camera, and all you have to do is rotate this forward and the mirror will lock up. So what's the mirror lock up for? If you're going to do something like some microscopy or high magnification work, or frankly even a star trails photo, you can lock the mirror up and then use the self-timer so that the mirror slap action of the shutter doesn't affect your image and doesn't introduce any shake into that image. If you don't use MLU with the self-timer, then the mirror will fire, or will raise right when the shutter fires, okay? So we're going to leave that up, and then self-timer will work with any shutter speed other than bulb. Sometimes the self-timer on this camera needs a little bit of help. This is the lens mount, and this is the lens mounting index, and this is the lens release button that you can use. You just push down and that unlocks the locking mechanism inside of the lens mount so that lenses can be removed and another one can be put on. The camera's back doesn't have too much, but we do have the serial number. Here we have the viewfinder eyepiece that you would look through to compose your images, and made in China. On this side of the camera, we have two PC sockets. Now, PC does not stand for personal computer. You cannot connect this camera to a computer. This right here is the one that's associated with X, and this one is the one that's associated with FP. FP flashes are single-use bulb flashes. If you have a flash that has a reusable bulb like this one, you connect it to the X if you're going to use a cable. This is a flash PC cable. Some flashes can connect, the flash I have does not have a port for it. Some flashes can connect directly to a camera via the PC cable, just like this being plugged in. The PC socket triggers a flash exactly like the hot shoe does. The bottom of the camera has a couple of things. Technically on the lens, this is a depth of field preview button right here that you can use to engage, to look at the lens and see how your images will look with the depth of field that they're going to get when the aperture stops down. This is your film rewind release button. We'll see how to use this in the second video. Tripod socket. We're going to open up the back of the camera by lifting up the film rewind knob and prizing open the film door. Everything in here is designed to work with your film, and we'll see how to load film in the second video. But right here is the film cassette chamber. This is where the film will go. Here's the shutter, this curtain right here. This will open and close to give you a certain amount of time that light can reach your film. And then this rectangle is the negative area. These 4 guide rails are called the film guide rails. Outer 2 are positioned so that the film doesn't move up and down in the camera as it's advanced. And then the inner 2 will work with the film pressure plate, and I'll show you that in just a moment, so that the film, when it's behind the shutter curtain, is flat and in the proper alignment for the lens to focus light on the film. Over here we have the film take-up sprocket, and what this does is it turns to pull the film through the camera as the film is advanced and the take-up spool turns. You might notice this has a whole lot of play in it, and that's more than 2 millimeters of play. So when you're using film that has spring memory built up in it from age, like this, what will happen is that your film will pull itself back into the cassette, or try to, and this amount of play, being more than 2 millimeters, means that yes, this camera will allow frames to overlap if the film sits inside of the camera for too long between photos. One thing is that then also when you push the film rewind button on the bottom, now this can spin freely, and that's why this button here allows the film to be rewound when you're done taking photos. Over here on the back of the camera's door, we only have one thing, and that's the film pressure plate that lines up right over here to sandwich the film flat. I do have some tips for using your Peafowl DF-1. If you just do decide to use it, there are some things that are very nice about it. It's all mechanical. There's no light meter. The viewfinder focusing screen in it is really nice. There's no distractions in it. That's really fantastic. It uses SR-mount lenses. So though I have struggled with having some SR-mount lenses work on it, SR-mount lenses are fairly affordable, and so you can get some affordable lenses for this camera if you pick it up without any, or you just want to expand the system a little bit. And also, being a fully mechanical camera, you don't have to worry about batteries exploding or leaking or having a dead light meter. Fully mechanical cameras are absolutely lovely. The next tip I have for you is that being a fully mechanical camera, you don't have a light meter, so you're going to have to bring your own. There are a few different things you can do. A handheld spot meter, that's the gold standard, but realistically not something you have to have for this. A vintage handheld scene meter can work really well also, or if you don't want to buy a light meter at all, you can just download a light meter app for your phone, and guess what? It's going to work a-okay for taking photos with your DF-1. In fact, that's what I do if I don't just kind of look at a scene and say, yeah, these numbers sound right, let's see if it turns out. Honestly, I don't use a light meter all that often, only when there's some tricky lighting, like extreme darkness or something like that. Some things not to do with your camera. Don't store the camera with the shutter ready to fire. Anytime you're done for the day, trigger the shutter. Now, the reason for that is because this is a fully mechanical camera, and when you arm the shutter, you put tension on a bunch of springs, and if you let those springs sit under tension for days or weeks or longer, they can develop a memory, which can affect shutter speed, or they could break, which could brick your shutter completely. Being a rare camera, or at least a highly uncommon one, you're not going to find someone who can repair this with parts, because you're probably not going to find someone who has a bunch of parts versions of these lying around. So try not to break your camera. So always trigger your shutter when you're done. The next thing is, don't actually touch the shutter curtain in the back of the camera, because you can damage it by pushing on it too hard or something like that, and that can brick your camera. The next thing is, the mirror behind the lens here, don't touch that. Your finger oils can cause it to tarnish, which will affect your ability to have a nice clear image in the viewfinder that you can use to focus with. Don't store your camera in your car. Extreme heat in the summer can cause lubricating oils, especially in the lens, to get very thin and get to places they shouldn't be, like the aperture leaves, which will then affect the aperture's ability to work properly when a photo is taken. There are also lubricating oils in the camera's body that you don't want to get places that they shouldn't be. In extreme cold, those same lubricating oils can become really thick and gummy and break down, and then they just don't lubricate properly and things don't move the way they should. And lastly, cameras in cars are always theft targets. So even if you're just hopping into the grocery store or something, don't leave your camera sitting on your passenger seat, take it with you. Don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box unless you have a good and rechargeable desiccant pack. Not the kind of desiccant pack that comes with your beef jerky or your latest jacket or whatever. You want one that has a metal case and you can toss it into the oven to recharge it when it's spent. And the reason is because plastic is moisture permeable, and moisture will make its way through the plastic, and then it will come to rest inside of the lens, which can cause fungus to grow in the lens and really affect your image quality in negative ways. Or moisture can get onto your camera's covering and cause mildew to grow, which is really going to affect your nose in negative ways when you go to take a photo. Don't let your Peafowl get wet. It's not weather sealed. Everything inside of it is metal. Metal rusts, and that's a good way to turn a working gear mechanism into a block of stuck together metal. And just remember, your Peafowl DF-1 is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So now that was everything for the first video. If you want to learn more about the operation of the Peafowl DF-1, here's a card that will take you to the second video.